The stench was unbearable. Flies buzzed in thick clouds over the rotting waste, and the air was heavy with decay. Jake had been here before. This part of the city was a forgotten wasteland, a place where people discarded not only their trash but their hope. But today was different. As he stepped carefully over broken bottles and torn plastic bags, something caught his eye. A small figure, barely visible among the heaps of filth. At first, he thought it was a pile of rags, but then it moved. Jake's heart pounded. He took a step closer. Lying there in the middle of the garbage dump was a child. A black child, no older than 4 or 5, staring up at him with wide, fearful eyes. What happened next would change everything. For a long moment, Jake just stood there, staring. The child didn't move, didn't speak. His small body was covered in grime. His clothes nothing more than tattered scraps barely clinging to his frail frame. His hair was matted, his lips cracked, and his eyes, his deep, dark eyes, were filled with something Jake couldn't quite place. Fear, hopelessness, or something worse, resignation. Jake swallowed hard. His first instinct was to call someone, anyone. The police? Social services? But he hesitated. He had seen how the system worked, how children like this one were shuffled around, lost in paperwork, forgotten. He knelt down, careful not to scare the boy. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "Are you okay?" The child didn't respond. He only stared. Jake glanced around. The garbage dump stretched for acres, a wasteland of discarded lives. There were no other people in sight. No sign of where the boy had come from. Had he been abandoned? Had he been living here? Jake felt a knot tighten in his chest. "Where's your family?" he tried again. Still nothing. But then, slowly, the boy moved. He reached into the pile of trash beside him and pulled out something. A small, torn piece of fabric. He held it tightly, his tiny fingers gripping it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Jake frowned. "Is that yours?" The boy nodded, barely. His lips parted, and for the first time he spoke. "Mommy's." Jake felt a chill crawl up his spine. He looked at the fabric more closely. It was old, stained, but there was something about it. A memory, maybe, connection. And then the boy did something that sent shivers down Jake's spine. He pointed, not at Jake, not at the trash, but at something deeper in the dump. Something or someone was waiting there. Jake hesitated only for a second before he took a deep breath and stepped forward. What he found next would haunt him forever. Jake followed the boy's tiny finger, his heartbeat quickening. The smell of decay thickened as he stepped deeper into the dump, careful not to slip on the uneven ground. He didn't know what he was expecting, but nothing could have prepared him for what he found. A mound of garbage had partially collapsed, revealing something buried beneath it. A figure, a woman. Jake's breath caught. He rushed forward, ignoring the filth, and knelt beside her. She was motionless, her dark skin barely visible beneath layers of dirt. Her clothes were torn, her body thin, too thin. For a terrible moment, he thought she was dead. But then a faint sound, a breath. "She's alive," Jake whispered, more to himself than to the boy. He turned back to him. "This is your mother?" The boy nodded, clutching the fabric in his hand like a lifeline. His eyes shimmered with something fragile, hope. Jake's mind raced. He had no idea how long she had been lying here. Days? Hours? He wasn't a doctor, but he knew she needed help. Fast. Carefully, he reached for his phone. No signal. Of course. This place was barely on the map, a forgotten corner of the city where no one cared what happened. He looked at the boy. "What's your name?" The child hesitated, as if trying to remember. "Elijah." Jake gave him a reassuring nod. "Okay, Elijah, we're going to help your mom, but I need you to trust me, all right?" The boy hesitated, then, slowly, nodded. Jake took a deep breath and slid his arms under the woman's frail body. She was so light, too light. He lifted her carefully, feeling the slow rise and fall of her breath against his chest. As he turned to leave, Elijah suddenly grabbed his hand. Jake looked down. "What is it?" The boy's small fingers trembled as he pointed to the garbage pile again. His voice was barely above a whisper. "There's more." Jake's stomach dropped. "More?" he repeated. Elijah nodded. "More people." Jake tightened his grip on the woman and scanned the dump again, his eyes widening as he noticed what he hadn't seen before. Subtle movements beneath the filth. Shapes. Bodies. The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a garbage dump. It was a graveyard, and some of the people buried here were still alive. Jake's breath came in short, sharp bursts. He wanted to believe the boy was mistaken, that his tired eyes were playing tricks on him. But as he stood there, clutching the frail woman in his arms, he saw it faint, almost imperceptible movements beneath the piles of waste. A trembling hand, a shifting piece of cloth, a muffled sound. There were people here, trapped, forgotten. His first instinct was to run to get Elijah and his mother to safety. But how could he leave when others might be clinging to life beneath the filth? "Elijah," he said, lowering his voice to keep the boy calm. "How many?" The child hesitated, counting on his fingers, his small brow furrowing in concentration. "I don't know," he whispered. "Maybe 5? Maybe more." Jake swallowed hard. He couldn't do this alone. Carefully, he adjusted the unconscious woman in his arms and turned toward the distant glow of the city skyline. Somewhere beyond the garbage dump, life went on as usual. People ate in restaurants, walked their dogs, scrolled mindlessly on their phones. Did any of them have the slightest idea that, just miles away, human beings were being buried alive under their discarded leftovers? He had to act fast. "Elijah, listen to me," Jake said, his voice firm but gentle. "We need help. I'm going to carry your mom, but I need you to be brave. Okay? Hold on to me." The boy hesitated, then nodded, gripping the back of Jake's jacket with his tiny fingers. With one last glance at the dump, Jake started moving. His feet slipped on rotting debris, but he pressed forward, muscles burning under the weight of the woman in his arms. Elijah kept pace beside him, his breathing ragged but steady. Minutes felt like hours, but then, finally, the edge of the dump came into view. Beyond it, an empty road stretched ahead. No traffic, no pedestrians, just cracked pavement leading toward the city. Jake's pulse quickened. He had to find someone, flag down a car, do something. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "You shouldn't be here." Jake stopped. The voice was deep, calm, and unmistakably threatening. Slowly he turned. A man stood at the edge of the dump, half hidden in the shadows. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in ragged clothes, but there was something sharp in his gaze, something that told Jake this man was no ordinary scavenger. Jake tightened his grip on Elijah's mother. "Who are you?" The man stepped closer, his boots crunching against the dirt. "The real question," he said, tilting his head, "is what you think you're doing." Jake's jaw clenched. "There are people back there, alive. We need to get them out." The man exhaled through his nose, almost like a laugh. "You think this is some kind of accident? That people just end up here?" Jake's stomach twisted. "What are you saying?" The man's expression darkened. "I'm saying," he murmured, "that some people want them here." A cold chill ran down Jake's spine. Elijah pressed closer to his side. "Mister," the boy whispered, "I don't like him." Jake didn't either. But before he could respond, headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the darkness. Car was coming. Jake had a choice: stand and face the man, or run. And with every second that passed, he knew one thing for sure: whatever was happening in this dump, it was bigger than he had ever imagined. The headlights grew brighter, cutting through the night like a silent promise of escape. Jake's heart pounded as he tightened his grip on Elijah's mother. The man in the shadows watched him closely, his expression unreadable, but his words lingered like a warning. "Some people want them here." Who and why? Jake didn't have time to figure it out now. His priority was getting Elijah and his mother to safety. The car was almost upon them. Without hesitation, Jake stepped into the road, waving his free arm. The vehicle, a rusted pickup, slowed, then stopped. The driver, an older black woman with sharp, knowing eyes, rolled down the window. "What in God's name?" she muttered, taking in the scene. "No time to explain," Jake said quickly. "She needs help badly." He motioned to Elijah's mother in his arms. "There are more people trapped in the dump. I need to get them out." The woman's gaze flicked to Elijah, then to the man standing in the shadows. Her jaw tightened. "Get in," she said, unlocking the door. Jake hesitated. "But," she cut him off, "you can't help anyone if you're dead, son. Get in." Something in her tone left no room for argument. Jake climbed into the truck, pulling Elijah in beside him. As soon as the door slammed shut, the woman hit the gas, speeding away from the dump. Jake glanced back. The man in the shadows hadn't moved. He just stood there watching them go. The truck rumbled down the cracked road, the city's lights growing closer, but still feeling impossibly far away. Jake turned to the woman. "Who are you?" She kept her eyes on the road. "Name's Gloria." "You seem to know what was happening back there," Jake pressed. "That man, he said people want them in the dump. What did he mean?" Gloria's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "You don't want to know." Jake exhaled sharply. "I think I do." She was silent for a long moment. Then finally she spoke. "There's a whole world under this city, kid. People fall through the cracks all the time. Homeless, runaways, the forgotten. But some," she shook her head, "some don't just fall. They're pushed." Jake felt his stomach twist. "Pushed?" Gloria's voice was grim. There are people who make money off the invisible. Government contracts for shelters that don't exist. Food donations that never make it to the hungry. And when someone becomes too much trouble, when they ask too many questions, when they fight too hard, they disappear. You saw where? Jake clenched his fists. You're saying someone is dumping people there? Gloria nodded. And not just leaving them for dead. Some survive barely. They scavenge, they huddle together. But they're off the grid, no ID, no records. To the world, they don't exist. A sick feeling settled in Jake's gut. He looked at Elijah, who clutched his mother's limp hand. The little boy had been living in that nightmare. His mother, too. And God only knew how many others. Jake turned back to Gloria. How do we stop this? Gloria let out a tired sigh. That's the question, isn't it? She pulled the truck into an alley behind a worn-down building. First, we take care of her, she said, nodding toward Elijah's mother. Then we figure out what comes next. Jake helped lift the woman from the truck, his muscles aching but his mind racing. He had stumbled onto something much bigger than he'd ever expected. And he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going to walk away. Whatever was happening in that dump, whoever was behind it, he was going to find them. And he was going to make sure the world saw what they had tried to bury. Jake sat in the dimly lit back room of Gloria's small apartment, his mind racing. Elijah was curled up on a worn-out couch, exhausted, but still gripping the tattered piece of cloth, his mother's. She lay on the bed nearby, her breathing steadier now, though she had yet to wake. She'll need a hospital soon, Gloria muttered, handing Jake a cup of strong coffee. But we can't take her to just any ER. If what I think is true, there are people out there who don't want her to talk. Jake clenched his jaw. Then we need to find out who they are before they find us. Gloria studied him for a moment, then nodded. I might know someone. The next morning, Gloria took Jake to meet an old friend, Marcus, a former investigative journalist who had spent years exposing corruption before mysteriously losing his job. When Jake told him what he had seen at the dump, Marcus's face darkened. I knew something was happening, Marcus murmured, sifting through old notes. Homeless shelters getting less funding despite more people needing help. People vanishing without a trace. But no one would listen. He slammed a folder onto the table. Until now. Inside were names, documents, and pictures. Pieces of a puzzle that had been ignored for too long. At the center of it all, a powerful business conglomerate that had been funding city cleanup projects. Under the guise of reducing urban waste, they had been orchestrating the forced removal of unhoused individuals, dumping them like garbage, literally erasing them from society. This goes higher than we thought, Marcus said grimly. We need proof. Public proof. Jake nodded. Then let's get it. Over the next few days, Jake, Marcus, and Gloria worked in secret, gathering testimonies from people who had survived the dump. With the help of an anonymous whistleblower, they retrieved internal documents exposing the company's involvement. Then they took it public. Marcus published a damning report, while Gloria called every news station that would listen. Social media exploded with outrage. The city was forced to take action. Arrests were made. Officials resigned. Investigations were launched. Most importantly, the people in the dump, the forgotten souls, were finally seen. Elijah's mother eventually woke up. Her first word was his name. The moment he rushed into her arms, Jake felt something shift inside him. For the first time in a long time, he believed in hope. Weeks later, as he stood at the edge of the now abandoned dump, he took a deep breath. The stench was still there, but the people weren't. They had been saved. And for Jake, that was enough. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. Got another lead. You in? Jake smiled. Always.